Hi, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of The Lunch Bunch. Today we have the authority on Google Authorship, Mark Traphagen. Mark, as you may know, if you spend any time on this platform, is a prolific content writer. I mean, he was that even before he and Eric Engig exchanged vows. It's amazing what he's doing, what he did before, and now it's even more so that there's two guys doing content. So anyway, I'm going to introduce you to Mark, and if I didn't say, he's the Senior Director of Online Marketing at Stone Temple, and we're going to be talking about Google Authorship and its relevance to authority, and if things have changed, since the last time you may have heard about it, or if you haven't heard about it at all, you've come to the place to get all the information you need. So we're going to start with introducing Mark, which I just did, and then the other Lunch Bunch crew is Scott. Scott, want to say hi, Scott?
Hi. With the obligatory weather report that it should be cloudy, but there's a little bit of sun in Seattle.
See, I like giving value with these shows. You get every weekly weather report on what's happening in Seattle, and maybe we can ask Vivek in London to give us the same. Vivek, how are you?
I'm fine, and the weather is sunny and really warm for a change.
Oh, okay, thanks. So that was Vivek from balmy London. So, Mark, good to see you, man. I mean, I've been following you for, I hope you don't feel like I'm a stalker, but I've been following you for a long time and reading all the amazing content. I mean, everything I know pretty well about authorship, it comes from you. And, we've exchanged some things back and forth, and I was part of that sort of experiment you did when all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of snippets that dropped out of the site on the search engine, and that was very interesting. And that's what I love about you, is that actually you take the time to research and do this on your own and then present those results. So thank you very much. Applaud. And want to say anything before we start?
Yeah, really glad to be here. Always love connecting with you, Ray. You've always been one of my favorite people on Google+. Seriously, and great to be with you. And I've got two more here. Scotty and Vivek are people that I love seeing around the Plus as well. So this is a great bunch to hang out at lunch with. Certainly, two things very quickly. One, it's hot and sunny here in North Carolina, which is not unusual at all for this time of year. And the second is, you said that I'd exchanged vows with Eric Engel. Well, I'm extremely happy to be working with Eric at Stone Temple Consulting. I am very happily married to Karen Traphagen.
Yes, just in case someone may have misinterpreted that. Okay, because we live in a different time, right? So, Mark, let's go right to the obvious question. What is authorship?
Well, Google Authorship, specifically, which is what we're talking about, is a program that Google introduced right about the same time as Google+, and that's no mistake, as we'll make clear in a moment. At the simplest level, Google is on a long-term drive, a long-term journey to want to identify what they call entities. And entities are simply things in the real world, people, places, things like that. And to understand those and for them to know what those are and what the connections between those entities are in a way very similar to how we as humans put that together and know that. So, I see your face. I know that's Ray Hiltz. I know that he does the Lunch Bunch on Tuesdays. I know that he's associated with Scotty Scowcroft and Vivek and other people, et cetera, et cetera. I know he lives in Canada. So these are things that Google wants to be able to understand more and more. Particularly, authorship relates to content creators. So if you create content online, Google wants to know who you are and what content you've created, what content you should be connected with across the web, not just on Google+, but anywhere on the web. Now, why do they want to know that? They want to know that because as we move into the era of what some people call semantic search, they want to move from just analyzing things like keywords on a page to beginning to understand more and more, have a machine understanding, which is pretty weird and awesome, of what people relate to what and how people relate to things. So if they can understand that I'm a content creator, they understand what content I'm connected to and what it's about, and then they can understand who thinks that's important, who shares that, who comments on it, who engages with it. All those things together can become an important signal that this author on this topic might be someone we want to pay a little bit more attention to, and that other people, via search and other Google products, might want to know more about. So in a nutshell, again, Google Authorship is a way of connecting real people with the content that they create online.
You've done an amazing slide deck. Actually, shared it on SlideShare, which I shared on the event page, and actually I shared a couple of slides from it. I love it because I'm a big Mad Men fan. But the slide deck is author authority for advanced search marketers. Now, I just want to be clear, this show is not necessarily for advanced search marketers, but for anybody who publishes content on the web. But in that, the title is author authority. And what does author authority have to do? How is it connected to authorship?
Well, that's a great question. I did that slide deck. I did that presentation at SMX Advanced 2 weeks ago because while I've been connected specifically with Google authorship for about the last 3 years, people associate me with that. What I see is Google beginning to move beyond that. And I don't mean abandoning it. They're still using the connection wherever they can and where they can get people to adopt it. And this show isn't about all the technicalities of that, but basically there's markup that you do, there's link connections that you make between the content you publish out on the web and your Google Plus profile that allows Google to verify that you're the author of that content. Now, they still encourage us to do that, they still want us to use that, but the realization is that the vast majority of people who create content haven't adopted that. Maybe they haven't even heard of it, or if they did, they don't understand what it's about, so they don't bother with it, or it's too geeky or too technical, whatever the reasons. So Google knows they've got to move beyond that. And so my presentation was about that even if you use Google Authorship, and especially if you use Google Authorship, you have to be thinking in terms of real-world personal authority. What are you known for? What matters about you? What do people come to you specifically, seek you out, look for you online or wherever else, come to a conference because you're speaking there, because you're talking about that topic. It's creating content that establishes in people's minds, this is the guy, this is the woman that you want to talk to about this topic. So that's the overall idea of author authority, the importance of it, and I think it's extremely powerful because people will, human beings were geared this way. We've been formed by evolution to identify with other human beings, and we naturally respond to a real human being long before we respond to a faceless brand or logo. So if you're creating great content and you're a real person and people feel like they know who you are, then that's very powerful.
I think you've touched on a very important point that I'd like to sort of expand on, and that's the real-world authority. Not just the Google platform authority. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people maybe have the misconception that you have to put all your eggs in the Google Plus basket to reap any search or SEO benefits. And I think what you're saying, and I agree totally, I think it's more important to build your authority through your home, which is your website, and the content that you create, wherever that content lies, because that's the whole point of authorship, right? Because it links all that content to you. So I just want to underline that point is that it's real world. It's on the web as a whole and not just on the Google Plus platform.
Absolutely. Google is just merely the engine that Google has used as a first step toward identifying who those authors are, giving us an opportunity to make that physical connection with our content. And where I say where they're going is, and why I think it's important to keep developing that real-world authority, is Google wants to get to the place where they will be able to tell that this is you and this is your content and this is what you should be connected with, even if you haven't done this Google Plus, Google authorship connection or markup. Now that's still years down the line that they're working on that technology. But in the meantime, Google authorship is a way to kind of boost that if you want to be connected in that way with your content.
Vivek has a comment up, and I can't read it in the thumbnail, so I'm going to trust that it's relevant. So Vivek, I'm going to pin you. Could you? It's from Sally Sue Ember. Cool.
Yeah, she's asking, I think it's directed towards Mark. Please explain how or what it means besides to my blog to my entity and pages. What do you mean by use Google Author Authority?
Okay, this is, again, the half-hour show that we have, we can't get into all the mechanics of setting up Google Authorship, but there are some really good guides out there. I'll plug right now my Google Authorship community. If you just search Google Authorship and go to the community tab on Google+, you'll find this as the Google Authorship and Author Rank community, and we have a how-to category in there, where we keep in that how-to category some of the best blog posts and other guides that have been written out there on how to connect up authorship. But just very quickly, without getting into all the geeky or technicalities, at the simplest level, it's placing a link on content that you create anywhere on the web, on your own blog post, on somebody else's blog or website. You place a link to your Google Plus profile. And this authorship only works for personal profiles. Then on your personal profile, you link back to that site from a section in the links called Contributor To. If you go to your About tab on your Google Plus profile, you edit the links section, you'll see a special section called Contributor To. And that's to tell Google all the places that you contribute to, where you produce content. You only have to put that link once for each site. That makes the two-way link that gives Google confidence that this is your content. There can be a lot more to it. You should look up those guides online on how to set up Google Authorship. You can even Google for that. But that's to give you a basic understanding of how you make that connection.
Yeah, that's a great community, by the way, to answer any of these kinds of questions. I dip in there once in a while when I'm lost. The most probably obvious element of authorship, the L-author, is to have your snippet appear in search. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could just maybe speak to that in terms of what the benefits are and perhaps what people think they are and they're not really.
Okay, in order, partly, I don't think it's the only reason they did it, but partly in order to incentivize people to use Google Authorship to set up those connections. Like, why would you do it? Well, if you understand search and you understand where search is going, what I was explaining earlier about semantic search and entities, then you would want to do this because you want Google to have that understanding. You want Google to be able to identify what you're an expert in. But the second, or the more visible benefit that they gave, the kind of the carrot to get people to set this up, was that if you have it set up properly, you may, I'll emphasize may, it's not automatic, you may qualify to have your Google Plus profile photo show next to your content in search. Now, what does that get you aside from an ego boost, I guess? It actually can be very important. People, remember we were talking before about how we're programmed that we connect with people, and we connect particularly with faces. If there's a face anywhere on a page or a set of images, your eyes will go, even without thinking about it, to that face. So if you're looking at a set of search results, if you know anything about search, you know how coveted those top positions are, and they get almost all the clicks. And so as you go even down the first page, you get fewer and fewer clicks. But if you're down, 4, 5, 6 positions down the page, but you have that first author photo, people's eyes will be drawn to that, and they'll be more likely to click on it. And there's been a number of studies done that have proven that, in general, those results do get more clicks. So you get more traffic. So that's the, the carrot and stick kind of approach of what you can get for this.
So, and you mentioned that it's not automatic. Right, there are elements that go into whether Google does put your snippet on that page, and I'm going to share one of the slides that you had included in your slide deck, the factors in authorship retention, and maybe we could just talk briefly of each of these points, because I think this exemplifies very clearly where Google is going with this, and what you were saying earlier, their whole strategy on implementing authorship to begin with. So if we could start maybe with the first factor, site authority and history.
Right, and just quickly a little background on this. Back in December of 2013, Google did what had been announced. Matt Cutts of Google announced this at PubCon Las Vegas back in the fall, that they were going to begin to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the amount of these authorship rich snippets, as we call it, those author photos in search, in order to improve the quality. And sure enough, in December, we saw that dip. We saw people who were getting it all the time before stop getting it or get it partially. So I implemented a study. I took over 300 different author profiles of people who I knew were actively using Google Authorship, and I did kind of a before and after. Who stayed the same, who lost authorship completely in search, and who got it partially. And then I looked and dug and tried to see, what factors might be in common. So very quickly, these are listed in the order of the priority that I saw, or the common. The number 1 is much more common than number 3. Now, I think in the years to come, that's going to flip. I think author trust is going to become much more highly as Google becomes more confident about that. But now back to number 1, site authority and history. The number 1 commonality that we saw in these 300 profiles is that if they were consistently writing on sites that Google trusts, sites that have a good, clean history with Google, that have high domain authority and generally high page authority, that get lots of really good quality natural links, those types of things that Google likes to see, then surprise, your author photo is more likely to show, especially for those sites. And it seems like, can't exactly verify this is just correlative, but it seems like if you publish a lot on those sites, you're more likely to show for all the sites, even if you publish on a lesser known site. So that's not surprising to me right now because Google's already good at that. They've been doing that since for well over 10 years, evaluating sites. So that's the first factor.
So the second one, the content quality, that's we have to sort of like, what is content quality? I mean, it's like saying, okay, well, you just have to write awesome content, and no one actually tells you what that awesome content is. So can you maybe give us an example or what you feel the content quality and how that impacts on the search?
Well, 2 and 3 are mostly there because we did get some statements in January from a couple of Google representatives who mentioned those as being factors in whether or not your authorship was showing in search. So that set me back. I suspected they might be, but that was harder to verify. So that set me back into looking at hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content by these authors we were studying, and what I saw was that on the whole, and again, I will totally admit this is a subjective, impressionistic, because again, when you say quality or awesome content, what does that mean? Do we even know what Google means by that? But generally, I tended to see that the kind of stuff that I would think of as somebody who reads a lot of content online as being, this stands out, this is unique, this is something this author consistently is taking a unique take on his or her topic. They're not just rehashing what everybody else is saying. They're putting some work into it. There's meat, there's substance here. That I would overwhelmingly among these authors that were still getting their authorship snippet showing in search, you'd see that kind of quality as opposed to what we generally call thin content, which is, I don't get people thinking that it's just with length. It doesn't mean that, but typically, if it's content is shorter, it doesn't go into much depth, it doesn't really say anything unique, then they'd be less likely to show. Okay.
I mean, we could talk for about 2 hours on this subject. It's very interesting.
Trying to be something. There is a lot on each of these. Let's
you've got a comment?
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually must be one of your fans, Mark.
Yeah,
Christian.
Yeah, Kristen Drysdale's like you, Vivek. She shows up on every show I do. I think people never see. Hi, Kristen. Great to see you. And we'll be on the DMA show at the top of the hour.
Yeah, so Mark's going to run from this TV studio to the one across the hall. So just like the NBC studios and radio.
The old Bob Hope show specials where they used to say like, oh, look, Arnold Palmer was keeping the special across the hall.
If I could get back to the content before that, the big question I want to ask at the end is, you put a lot of emphasis on differentiation. On people writing original content. How does it impact on, can you give me a sense of curated content or, well, I guess curation mostly, because it's obvious if you're just going to regurgitate the same stuff that you're reading, is not going to stand out. But where does curated content fit in this?
Well, curated content isn't specifically intended for Google authorship, because Google put out an FAQ back in a frequently asked question blog post back in the early fall of last year, about 8 questions about Google authorship. It was the first real content we had from Google of any substance on authorship since they introduced it, back in 2011. And one of the things that they said in that FAQ, and I'll try to remember. Somebody remind me if I forget. I'll post a link to that in the comment events later this afternoon. But the event comments. But anyway, they said that authorship is definitely intended for for content that is original and by the connected author. So curation wouldn't really be a part of this. Now, I think curation could be important on the bigger topic of author authority, especially in social media. If you, I think you've got to have your own original thing going on, but in between, if you're sharing and resharing really good high quality content that's on topic for what you usually talk about from other people, people appreciate that, and they come to want to follow you, want to be associated with you, because they know not only are they going to get good original content from you, but you're doing the homework for them. You're finding some of the other best stuff out there. So I think for the overall topic of author authority, that can be very important.
I just want to bring up a comment from Christopher. And he's asking, can video blogging count as awesome content? Are we speaking about, multimedia blogging, video, audio, text?
Well, I can speak to that quickly if you want. Right now, probably not, because Google is working on the technology. We see them experimenting with it in many different ways to be able to identify video and still images in the same way they can identify words now very well. That's coming. They're working on it. I don't think it's a factor yet, but I do firmly believe that we are going to have form of author authority for images and videos in the future as they improve that technology.
Cool. Scott, did you have any questions?
Well, I've got one question. For someone such as myself who does a lot of posting and then maybe occasionally something on my own blog, is authorship for me? I don't guest blog or anything like that.
Well, we'll poll the membership committee and see if we want to let you in, Scott.
Well, it seems like I'm at a competitive disadvantage if I don't spread myself out to all sorts of other places.
Well, I understand that, and that's a great question. First of all, Google Plus in particular seems to count toward authorship. And when I say count, I say we don't really know all the ways that Google is counting authorship yet, but by the fact that in search results, if a Google Plus post that you've done publicly shows up, it can show up with your authorship photo next to it. There's also in Google Webmaster Tools, they've had a thing for a while now in the lab section called Author Stats, and you can actually go in and see statistics for people who are viewing and clicking on content that has shown in search associated with your Google authorship, and you can see Google Plus posts in there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you list your other social networks like Twitter or Facebook make those connections on your Google Plus profile, I think it's possible that Google is at least looking at that, and in the future that may account more for something. So I think Google Plus activity is important in what we call the generic term that people have brought up is author rank. It's not a term that until recently, Google's kind of grudgingly adopted it because we use it so much, but Matt Cutts has talked about it. It's something that they're moving toward. So I think all that activity counts. And for somebody who, but the truth of the matter is that to build real author authority with Google, you're going to have to be doing content in diverse places. You should be doing content on your own site on a regular basis, and if you can get the opportunity and you have the ability and the energy to get good guest posting, which is still a valid thing to do, out on other high authority sites that are relevant to your topic.
I like to. Oh, sorry, Scott. Go ahead. Finish.
Well, just real quick. Let's say I do everything that you say that I'm supposed to do, and it just perfectly, and then I slow down or almost stop. What's the half-life? How soon before it? How long does it last?
Well, nobody that I know has measured that. It's a great question. Again, because we don't know to what extent they're using the authority or how. We know some things. Just quickly, by the way, that they've said recently that we didn't really talk about that third factor of author trust, which again I only have in there because they've mentioned it. And so we know that it is now a factor for qualifying for certain features, like getting your photos showing in search. Another one is, some of you may have seen the in-depth articles feature. It only shows up for certain very short-tail search results. But if you search something like SEO or, I can't think of another example right now, but certain topics, that they'll show a box in the first page of search results that has 3 in-depth articles that go deeply into that topic. Now, they still tend to be these days from very well-known publisher sites, like New York Times or the Rolling Stone or Atlantic or something like that. But they have said that there is an author factor in that if we have a trusted author, we're more likely to show. And occasionally, they'll even, in a very little tiny thumbnail clip, show the author and a little tiny photo with that in-depth article. So that's just the beginning. Now, to answer your question very quickly, we don't know, but we do know, and we have seen it in other situations, that Google does like to see regular content, regular fresh content. Let me give you a very quick example of that. The publisher connection, which we haven't talked about and don't really have time to talk about today, but that's a way of connecting up your brand page with your official website. If you do that properly, you can begin to show for what we call a branded search. When people search for your brand name online, you've probably seen these. In the right-hand panel, instead of ads, there will be a box that highlights that site and its Google Plus page. And it will usually show one or two of the most recent posts. I've experimented with this and seen this, but I've also had somebody from Google confirm it. If you stop posting on your Google Plus page, you're just not keeping up with it, eventually that will fall out. So there is looks like there is some kind of half-life, but we just don't know exactly what it is.
Oh, wow. Yeah, 4 minutes left, and there's so much I want to know. So let's cut to the big question. For a long time, people were using Google Plus as the carrot to lure people onto the platform, saying, hey, if you want to be found in search and optimize your SEO, you have to be a Google Plus. To me, that was basically a bribe that was kind of baseless, because there's so many other factors that go into that. But could you speak to authorship and SEO?
Sure. That's like a really hard topic to do in 3 minutes. But as succinctly as I can, a lot of people, you heard that, especially in the early days of Google Plus. I go to search conferences and people raise their hand in question period, talking to SEOs and saying do I need to bother with Google Plus? And they'd say, oh, I guess you do for the SEO, but that was right, just, nobody knew what that meant. Everybody is always looking in search engine optimization, which is trying to rank higher on Google so your business or whatever you're doing shows up more and you get more traffic from people. Everybody's always looking for the magic bullet, and magic bullets don't work anymore. There used to be a few magic bullet tricks you could do, but they just aren't working anymore. Google's gotten too smart for that. So Google Plus is not a magic bullet. Just being on Google Plus doesn't mean automatically everything you do online will rank higher. But it does have some effect. It has an effect in personalized search. More and more people, Google tells us, are using the web logged into their Google account, even if they're not using Google Plus on a daily basis. And if you have a large Google Plus following, you are influencing those search results. In personalized search, things that you recommend, or when people recommend your stuff, it can show up higher for relevant searches for people when they search logged into Google. There's also, we don't have any time to get into this, but there's relative authority of Google Plus profiles and pages and how much they can show up in search. So there are aspects. Like I said, most of it with the author authority, I think, is still in the future. Google wants to be more confident about that, but it's something that they are working toward in the future. That will be a factor in search results much more than it is today.
Thank you so much, Mark. We're at the end of the show, and I just want to give you one last opportunity before you run across the hall is there something you want to leave the audience with?
Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful show. Good to be with you guys. I will come back later. Right now, as I said, I have to run across the hall and do an hour-long digital marketing answer show. We're talking, if you're interested in SEO, we're talking about the history of SEO on that show today. But so I will come back later and try to catch. I know we had a lot of questions in the comments that we didn't get to. Be glad to respond to those later. But the parting word here is the most important thing is not to get all frantic about Google features or am I connected up to this or that right. If you can do that, great. But the most important thing is if it matters to you that people know and trust what you're about, and that matters to your business, to your cause, whatever it might be, then you want to be consistently building the kind of content that truly helps people, that shows that you know what you're talking about in your field, and engaging with people, help people, answer their questions. Do what I'm doing here today. Why am I on this show? Because in part because it helps build my authority in the real world with people. People come to trust me, and at the end of the day, we hope that means that they'll want to do business with me and my business when that time comes, if it comes for them.
Thanks so much, Mark. This has really been enlightening, and please just I'll repeat and replay the show so you can get that last segment because it's so important. So thanks again, everybody, for checking in with the Lunch Bunch. This is the last regular show of the regular season. We're going to summer repeats. I feel like like I'm at NBC Studios to further that analogy. So thanks again. We'll still be around. I mean, there may be a special or whatever. Maybe we'll have Sanish here do a special replacement show. I don't know. But thanks again. And take care until the next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.